We are right at the top of the hour, and we're going to call the meeting to order. And let's see, Debbie, would you note attendance? I can't tell if Janet's online. I must assume she is. Okay, great. First up, we have our agenda review. I would at this point accept a motion to approve the agenda as published.
I move to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, Debbie?
All right. Jonathan?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Owen?
Yes.
Lori? Yes. Tom?
Aye.
Aaron?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor?
All right, great. Well, this is our work session, and so we have a, kind of a reduced list of agenda items. First up is our long-range facility planning report presentation. So
Great. We're going to move up here.
Yep.
Good evening, Board. We have the long-range facilities planning report tonight to give you a review, a presentation on that, on the executive summary. This has been a long time in the works, and I've asked for Jonah Jensen and Greg McCracken to be here to present that executive summary to you. After that's complete, we're going to have our three committee members that are here today come up and join me so that they can give you their thoughts on the process as well. We also have one individual, Eliza Torlin, who's been zoomed in from California, and really glad that she can be here as well. You all have the materials. It's a 750-page report. That's it there in the 3-ring binder. And this will be a presentation on the 20-page executive summary. And so there'll be plenty of time after our committee members have a chance to share with you their thoughts and perspectives, and so that you can have hopefully a productive discussion and ask questions if you need to. I also have Brett Davison, our principal member of the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee, with us as well. And so having said that, I just want to introduce you to our two consultants from BLRB. Both Jonah and Greg are architects with the firm, and this is a firm that works with school districts all over the state. And if there's a medium to large size district, there's probably a good possibility that BLRB has worked on a project there. And so they have tons of experience, and I want to go ahead and turn it over to you, Greg and Jonah, and the time is yours.
Perfect. Go ahead. It's yours.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Board, for having us this evening. I know that we've worked with a few of you through this process, and really appreciate all your input throughout the process and your guidance as we've moved along this really ambitious effort. For those of you that don't know, I'm Jonah Jensen, principal in BLRB Architects. This is Greg McCracken, our managing principal. BLRB Architects. BLRB has been around for almost 70 years with a near exclusive focus on educational planning and design. It's kind of our bread and butter. It's what we do. And one of those specialties that we have is long-range facility planning, master planning, school bond planning, both in Oregon and Washington. We've done these quite extensively for a number of years now. And Greg and I have worked together 10 plus years, as far east as Pittsburgh, and then in Washington and Oregon as well. So pleasure being here. We really appreciate your time. This has been as Scott mentioned, a very ambitious endeavor. It's encompassed almost 3 years now. We're going on our 3rd year. I don't know if we have the slide deck pulled up or so.
Dan, can you check with Daniel?
Yep.
See if you can pull that up.
Yeah, and if not, I can talk from this as well. So, the timeline of the meetings, just to give kind of a brief history and summation of that. The first long-range facility planning meeting was in November of 2019. If the slide was up, it'd be a really good demonstration of just kind of the process, because there's a lot of asterisks associated with it. The LRB was hired a day before the third long-range facility planning meeting, and during that interview process, we're asked to come on board and get up to speed very quickly and effectively, and had a very, very engaging third long-range facility planning meeting where we broke off into small groups. We got a tour of Silverton Middle School, and it was really fun and engaging. Then, a couple weeks later, the executive order came down the pipe, and everybody was ordered to stay home and save lives. And so all of the meetings but 2 of our 15 total long-range facility planning meetings were virtual. As you all know, virtual meetings are a bit of a challenge, especially when you're trying to do small group work. So we really appreciate the committees and the board and the district's perseverance through all of those really challenging virtual meetings. That being said, we got a lot of really great feedback. We actually had our 5th meeting, was the last meeting that Interim Superintendent Paul Peterson said goodbye to the committee, and as his term and tenure was up. And then I had the pleasure of Scott coming on board during the 6th meeting, and really thankful for that, and it's been a really great experience thus far. Point being, there's been a lot of really challenging things that have come up through the process. There's been, to some degree, expectations and goals set up in the very beginning that we weren't necessarily privy to. All that being said, I think we've come up with a very, very thorough, very illustrative long-range facility planning report. And again, just can't be more thrilled with the committee's work through this. So we just had our 15th meeting a couple weeks ago where the committee had a chance to review the report, kind of provide feedback and guidance in the report. I think everybody saw some of the documentation there and how we took that feedback and incorporated it. It was really good because it's not just the committee's perspective on it. How is my community going to perceive the report? How are my neighbors going to perceive the report? And having that really good feedback helps us craft something very unique to Silver Falls School District. Not only were those meetings, the 15 meetings that were about 3 to 4 hours apiece and about 45 hours in total, informative for this process, but we also had educational adequacy meetings at each individual site. And each one of those meetings lasted anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on if it was the middle school or the high school or the elementary schools. So we had 20 plus hours just really getting good feedback from the K-8 communities, the K-5 communities, the middle school and the high school to understand kind of the wants and desires and all that. We wrapped that up in December 9th of 2020 with Silvercrest was our last meeting. And that really laid the framework and foundation for a lot of the work moving forward. So we had, I think, about a little over 100 participants in those educational adequacy meetings. And it was just really thought-provoking and insightful. The way we moved through those educational adequacy meetings is we had a checklist. Actually, we'll get to that in a little bit once we get there. The one I mentioned a little bit earlier about expectations kind of up front and how those were maybe a little bit different. We introduced norms in our 4th meeting just because we weren't really sure, to be honest. We got up to speed really quick to get into the 3rd meeting and got some really great feedback. If we can go to the next slide. Or sorry, 2 slides past this one. had a lot of really great feedback, but we wanted to make sure that everybody was in alignment with just kind of typical norms for working with the committee, and making sure that we were all on the same page there.
Yeah.
Great. And we revisited this at every start of every meeting, and read off every norm. And I think the one that was really important for this group to understand and grapple with is that at the end of the day, the Long Range Facility Planning Committee is a very, very, very important committee, but they are an advisory group. You know, it's important to recognize that they're an advisory group. At the end of the day, the final decisions are made by the school board and how the bond is formulated, you know, the ultimate long-range facility plan. So I think that's something that's just important to illustrate, because I think we wanted to be very clear and succinct about those at the beginning of each meeting. Next slide, please. So this is the part where it's going to be a little bit boring, so I won't read through every small detail unless you want me to. I'm more than happy to. But at the end of the day, the deliverable is a technical report to ODE, the Oregon Department of Education, that has to adhere to guidelines set out by OAR, and there's 5 overarching categories that ODE really wants to see. The first one has to do with population projections and looking out to the 10-year horizon. The second one is to do with collaboration with local government planning agencies, and that's more specifically tailored to, are we looking at getting additional property, additional sites, and if so, they want to see collaboration with your local jurisdictions to understand any kind of opportunities for sharing and things like that. The third one is really where this committee's work shined a lot, and that was the evidence of community involvement. And that was everything from determining the educational vision of the local community, reviewing costs of identified improvements, prioritizing those improvements, and then determining potential sources of funds. The fourth one, identification of buildings on the historic preservation list, and we'll go through some of these details a little bit here. And then the fifth one is the one that's been changing a little bit over the years. It's the educational adequacy component. And how do we quantify that for each individual site to ensure that there's equity in the district and that it adheres to the vision for the district. So we'll go into a little bit of that detail. If we can go to the next slide, please. So overarching, I'll just give some kind of findings for each one of these categories, and then we'll go into basically general findings from the group as a whole. The population projection findings, that work was really validated and precipitated on the PCR, the Portland State University Population Center report. And they had projected a modest growth of 6% over the next 10 years. And there was a work group that was convened early on in the process in 2017-18 that came up with some of these conclusions. Silverton High School has significant room for enrollment growth. Projected enrollment capacity district-wide was not a predominant contributing factor to a 10-year plan. However, a lot of students are in portables, you know, specifically at Silverton Middle School, which is a place to learn, but it's not maybe an ideal learning environment. The PCR projected that the middle school enrollment would be 475 by 2027. So we looked at planning for a middle school that was 500 students, just to add an additional capacity there, but not too much capacity where it became cost prohibitive to build. And then, of course, the big downer, which is COVID's had a significant impact to enrollment, as you're all very, very well aware. You know, Silver Falls currently is about 10.9% below what they were projected to be in the Portland State University PCR. Now, how long will that last? That's hard to say. You know, that may be just a blip because of COVID, but that is a reality. So those are some findings there related to the population projections. The collaboration with local government, I'll keep this short and sweet. We didn't, the findings didn't validate a need to add additional classrooms throughout the district or schools. So therefore, there was no real need to collaborate. with the local government. Now, that being said, Jason, with the City of Silverton, the Community Development Director, was part of 3 of our meetings, specifically at the Silverton Middle School, where we explored the program, the capacity, and the needs at Silverton Middle School, and he was a tremendous asset in that process. We did vet out an alternative north site at the middle school. You know, it's the one that's owned by the district still, but it was another opportunity. We had about, I think, 4 different options, just kind of exploring what the middle school, how it could be planned and programmed around the site. And the committee ultimately advised that it stay in its current location, but be a phased and occupied replacement. So replacement of the Schlater building, replacement of everything but the gymnasium, locker rooms, because those have recently gotten a seismic rehabilitation grant 3 years ago. So, and just it's a good, prudent use of community dollars to do that, to keep that. So he was part of those meetings. That was really great and really helpful and informative. Going on to the next slide, the community involvement findings. Determining the educational vision of the local community. Well, the district determines the educational vision of the community. The school board determines that. But at the end of the day, you know, we had worked really closely in hand with the committee to just kind of give some ideas for different kinds of learning environments in long-range facility planning meeting number 5. Some of those ideas are just spot on. Some of those ideas may not necessarily be the right fit for Silver Falls School District, and that's okay, you know, because every community is different, every district's different, and so we want to make sure at the end of the day, anything that's planned for Silver Falls School District is right for Silver Falls School District. We met with a majority of staff and teachers at all of the sites, like I said, over 100. And developed the educational adequacy standards. At that time, we'd worked with interim superintendent Paul Peterson to just get buy-off on kind of the approach and some thoughts. And there was really 43 criteria upon which we based the educational adequacy of each site. In addition to that, and outside of the long-range facility planning process, but actually really informed it in a very, very positive way, was the K-8 listening sessions that the school district took upon to go out to the communities, work with the work group in those 3 sessions, and then hear firsthand what was important to those communities. That was really illuminating and really, quite honestly, inspiring, I thought, to hear that. When we looked at the costs of those identified improvements, again, just going back to that community engagement piece and bringing it to the committee, understanding the improvements. The big one obviously is the middle school, and we looked at those costs and kind of looked at those scenarios. But there was also the additional needs at all the other schools, and we'd come up with some programs, some ideas based on the educational adequacy meetings and based on some of the feedback that we'd heard from some of the prior work in the Nelson survey. And at that time, the direction of the committee was, well, let's work with Lauren to understand what are really the deferred maintenance needs for those facilities and what's the best approach, which is, I mean, spot on. And so Lauren and I worked together to come up with some prioritization that we brought back to the committee to get an understanding on. So you'll kind of see the priority 1 through 3. A lot of that was working with Lauren, bringing it back to the committee, getting feedback from the committee, and really validating that. So, you know, looking at those costs, that helps with the prioritization. Now, whether or not the school board decides to go for a larger bond or a smaller bond, or, you know, that's really at the pleasure of the school board. But we wanted to give a bunch of different kinds of scenarios to give a roadmap for some opportunities moving forward. Those priorities were shared in a couple of those meetings. The K-8 listening sessions really brought to light some additional priorities that I think are in sync with some of the educational adequacy that we learned early on, but we're really enlightening there. And then, of course, determining potential sources of funds for improvements. Piper Sandler did a really excellent job of doing some geo bond analysis early on before we came on board, and then they updated it for multiple scenarios, a 60, 70, 80 million dollar scenario, and then an outlier, $130 million scenario. What would it look like for the community from a tax-based perspective, and using that as the foundation for prioritization? It's kind of the thinking there. There's also, of course, the $4 million Awesome Grant, which Silver Falls School District would be eligible for, and which, of course, we would help the district apply for on that. So, the historic register. This one I'll be quick and brief. There's all but 3 schools in the district that qualify to be on the historic register, and the 3 that don't are Scotts Mills, Victor Point, and Silverton High School, and that's just based on their age. Anything that's 50 years and older technically qualifies, and you can get it on the register if that's a desire of the district. The only school that the district had on the register that I'm aware of is the old Victor Point, which was sold a few years ago. So that didn't have much consequence. We did look at a matrix of aging buildings to get an understanding of how all of the facilities play into that. And the average age, if you take all of the additions and the buildings and aggregate it, is about 50 years old. Of course, that's looking at everything from a small kitchen addition to a bigger thing. So it's a baseline to work from. The final section is, again, that educational adequacy. And ODE is not super qualitative or quantitative about this piece. So, this is really an important element to the whole plan. So again, we worked closely with the district to come up with 43 checkpoints to understand kind of educational adequacy as we went through and met with each individual user group and came up with an analysis based on that. And to give a little bit of context of how those meetings went, they were all virtual, of course, and some of them had full 100% participation. And we moved through each individual item just to give that same relationship and got consensus on one item before we moved on to the next. And so we used the same foundation, the same data points, so it's not necessarily a free-for-all that somebody comes up with their own score. It's all based on the same information. So we kind of helped facilitate that and got some really great feedback. More important than the actual scoring was just the feedback, which you'll see there's quite a section in there related to that. Just a side note, ODE has been getting a little bit more comprehensive in their approach, and they've been kind of following our DLRB's cue a little bit and how we've been facilitating those. So they are getting a little bit more qualitative and quantitative, but it's still not, they look at 5 checkpoints, whereas we look at 43. So in preparation for those meetings, we look at capacity as well, and we validate that with the individual sites, to make sure that our understanding is correct there. So the next slide, which is, let's see here, identification of deficiencies in the current facilities. Each site-based committee helped us learn those deficiencies in addition to just our on-site observations. And those deficiencies are comprehensive, and they align with some of the deficiencies as outlined in the Kate listening sessions there. The district adopted standards, again, some of this is redundant because they say things a couple of ways, but we just want to make sure we're very thorough in that the identification of potential alternatives to new construction or major renovations. Of all the district buildings, the most critical need is Silverton Middle School. It's no big surprise. I don't know that there's anything, honestly, earth-shattering about the report. It's just good data to support those positions. Because of its condition, funds would be better appropriated replacing the middle school rather than repairing it. It would be more costly to repair it in its current state. Now, if the board and the school district wanted to go that route, you could certainly do it. It's more money. It's just making sure there's kind of an understanding of that. We certainly rehab old historic buildings all the time. It's just there's seismic updates, there's hazardous abatement, which you'd have to work with anyway. There's a lot of determining factors for the costs there. And then all of the facilities are being recommended for select improvements and more modest repairs, kind of a deferred maintenance, and being very cognizant of the investment the community's made in those schools over the years. High level summary of general findings. Again, I'll be honest, nothing super earth shattering in here. The middle school should be primary focus of this effort because of its imminent needs and therefore should be considered in the next bond measure. This appeared to be the main area of agreement amongst the committee and within the community. Feedback during those K-8 listening sessions validated that they would support that as well. The middle school should be replaced rather than renovated. That was something that was bore out through the process and should be a phased and occupied replacement. Use and light modernization of that existing gymnasium would be a prudent use of public dollars and should be part of the master plan. It's also a requirement for that 10 years district received seismic rehabilitation grant. Relocation of those athletic fields was not a high priority from this committee's perspective. It's important to the long-term success of the Silver Falls School District that there continues to be the level of transparency that you've afforded the committee and the community, and the via the listening sessions and otherwise. I think to me the report speaks for itself, and the appendix in the report, just the level of information the district has provided the community is, quite frankly, is exemplary, and I think it's something to be really proud of. The next bond measure should include improvements at all educational facilities in the district to gain alignment. A committee prioritization voting exercise was conducted twice through this process when we looked at kind of the 60, 70, 80, and 130, just to get a temperature check from the committee. What do they think would be the right approach? And both times they supported a higher, more ambitious bond measure, and thought that would be the right approach. Extending the useful life of all the facilities through maintenance repairs is critical and important. And then capacity was not determined to be a predominant factor. This should be considered really foundational for a long-range plan, for 2030 and moving forward. This is kind of that first step, working with ODE, adhering to those guidelines, and providing that really good foundation there. Next slide, please. I won't go into a whole lot of detail on this one because I think everybody's had a chance to look at kind of this brochure. This was really a summation of the work up through long-range facility planning number 12. And a lot of it is still, really a reflection of the committee's work. There's been some things in here like the K listening sessions that aren't necessarily in here, but just at a high level, it has the guiding principles in there, kind of the needs throughout the district. Some of those those potential scenarios, P1, P2, P3, those are all additive with the foundation being P1, leading up to P3. Just more information on kind of the program to which we got square footage and dollars and things like that for the middle school. And then, of course, the proposed improvements to all the other sites in the middle there. So what does that look like kind of moving forward? If we go to the slide after that, there's actually a really kind of high-level timeline that we've attached. It's actually in a Word document in the report. But, we started the long-range facility planning process in 2019 with us coming on board in 2020. We're now, in 2022. So now, the ultimate goal would be getting this to ODE, getting it bought off on, and then ultimately going for a bond recommendation and/or campaign at that time with a potential date, the date's been kind of presented to us as either May 2023 or November 2023. Whatever is the privilege of the board and the right direction to go. There, of course, would be 3 years of design, engineering, kind of understanding that, and it's not super, depending on which way you go, it's going to be staggered, right? But the construction's going to be probably 2 to 3 years total as well. The middle school itself, just being a phased and occupied site the way it is probably a 24-month duration in construction, just in of itself. Then, of course, project closeout, which would then lead you to reevaluating the long-range facility plan in 8 years, and coming up with the next round. So it's a cyclical process, and there's going to be a lot of just looking at the report, validating it, updating it, but then there'll be new information at that time, because there's just, the world changes so quickly, and the community changes quickly. Next slide, please. This is just, one thing we like to do our due diligence, just in general. So with ODE, we gave them a cursory review. I hope you don't mind, but we sent the first version of this just to get a sense for, does this pass the muster test? Do we, meet the compliance? And what's the veracity of the report? And they were very complimentary of the work the committee's done over these last few years. The direct quote from them was, Silver Falls School District's long-range facility plan is an excellent report. This one checks all the boxes with regards to reporting requirements, but I also appreciate that it provides the district with a truly actionable plan for the future. Now, this isn't us saying it or anybody on the committee saying it. This is the state who regularly looks at long-range facility plans from 197 different school districts throughout the state of Oregon. So there's some level of comparison associated with that. So, but with that, I know we have 4 people from the committee to speak, and we really appreciate the work that they've done thus far. Josh has just been extremely invaluable. He calls himself a facilities guy, but I think he's more of a strategist because he's always thinking about what are people going to think, how are people going to perceive this? So he's very pragmatic in his approach and measured, and it's been a really, really instrumental force on this committee. Ray Kaiser just, he looks at it from a variety of perspectives, historical perspective, has brought a lot of the history, but also as being a former educator within Silver Falls School District, he has that unique perspective on education and how it's delivered in the school district. And so he's been, really, really helpful. Not to put Ray on the spot, but I don't know how many are aware, he actually helped move in furniture when Evergreen first opened as a grade school student. So he's been around for a little while. Jackie was really instrumental in coming up with this document, and kind of having a summation of the process in the script. And this really, I think, just helped solidify the direction of the committee and made it easier for everybody to understand and communicate with. And she's always been, really great about messaging and understanding, just like Josh, very measured and very, really appreciative of her work. And then, of course, Eliza, who's really been there from the very beginning. Eliza was actually part of the selection committee that hired the LRB architects. So we've worked with Eliza from the very, very beginning. Really appreciate all of her hard work through this process. She really went above and beyond in helping set up the educational adequacy meetings, ensuring that we'd get really good turnout in those communities by working with the principals so that we could get really quality feedback. So really applaud the effort of this committee, of all the communities and the schools that we've had the privilege of working with these last couple of years. So,
Thank you, Jonah. Greg, any comments from your side?
Sure. I really am here for support. Jonah and I worked offline on this for many, many months, but just the duration of this process, I came in after one of our principals retired. So it's just how long that process came in. But certainly I'm here for questions and answers as we need, Scott. So.
Great. And so maybe what we'll do is we can open it up. If you have questions specifically to the report, while we have Jonah and Greg here, if you'd like to ask those, then I would have our committee members come up and tell you about their perspective and experience on the committee so that you can have a discussion after that, if you'd like to go in that route. So we can open it up to questions for Jonah and Greg from BLRB, if you wish.
Well, I've got one. On the population growth estimates, was that overall population or student population, or did it specify?
They look at Marion County and the surrounding community to get an understanding kind of the overall population, but then they target it specifically to student groups. So the report has some of that foundational information in it, but the ultimate goal in the PCR is to get the student group.
So just to clarify, that 10.9% drop with a student.
With a student,
assessment,
yep,
so.
yeah.
No, right, no, I just saw that 6% growth, and I didn't know if that meant
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
population of the people living in the district boundary, or if that meant population of projected student enrollment.
That was student enrollment was
Okay,
the projected.
thank you.
Yep.
Then that's the PSU report.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah,
and it's in
yeah.
the appendices.
Yep, yeah.
I didn't look at all the, sorry,
Oh,
I
well,
have
yeah.
to be honest, I didn't look at all the appendices.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was projected, I think that was 2017, 2018 was when they kind of did that work. And there was another committee that worked on that prior and came up with some of those findings.
Just for information and anecdotal at best, but we're working with dozens of school districts in Washington and Oregon. Most, if not all, have seen a dip in student populations over the last 2 years. The superintendents are just struggling to see when will it go back up and how much it will go back up, all anticipating at least some level of growth though. So it's kind of interesting. This is not a unique item.
Yeah, we just had the same conversation with your neighboring school district, Mount Angel, a few weeks ago as we were presenting our findings for their long-range facility planning, and they're about 12%, so pretty close to you guys.
Yeah, makes sense.
With the ODE compliance piece, will there be any further feedback from them, or is it just simply a pass, fail, check the box, you met the requirements?
Mostly it's a check fail, you meet the requirements, they'll take the report and say, it adheres to the guidelines. If there's anything that doesn't, or they see something that's amiss, they'll reach out
And
and
then
ask
we'll
for
have to
additional.
supplement in addition. We notify all of you of what that would be. My guess is we do that intentionally, reach out early on to make sure that we're actually providing any quote missing information or clarifications. And so that was that initial check. So we think it will most likely be checked and submitted and approved. So.
I had a question, Jonathan.
Yeah, go ahead, Janet.
This might be as much for Scott as for the architects. I'm trying to understand the recommendation process. So I see that the recommendation for the middle school was option D, and that is coming as a recommendation from the work group. I guess my question is, was there a specific recommendation with regard to P1, P2, or P3 other than, hey, the bigger the better? I think what I'm understanding is it's really up to the board now to decide how large of a bond we feel we can legitimately pursue, and that's really what's guiding that decision. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yes, that's correct. And the two brochures that, of course, you've seen many times through my updates to you are broken down into different bond amounts. So you see P1, P2, and P3. P3 would be all of P1 and P2
Right.
As well, and that would be the largest bond.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess we'll be able to bug Steve at a later meeting and get all of the sort of get in the weeds about those bond scenarios and what they mean and so forth. Perfect. Okay. I
Absolutely.
won't try to do that tonight
Yes.
then.
That would all be the pleasure of the board.
Perfect. Thank you.
And just so we have the public who may be viewing this meeting, all of the supplemental information and appendices are on our district website on the LRFPC tab, and you can see all of the meetings that we've had, the videos of the meetings, plus all the supplemental information as well.
And Scott, just on those bond scenarios that they're on the handout, I think they're great illustrations as to what we might need. Those are definitely just examples, and I think
Yes.
for our public watching too, those are not commitments to
Yes.
the numbers. These are just scenarios using estimates. Of course, we all know construction prices are all
Yep.
over the place. Building, this is just an idea, and we don't have to go with any of them. We can go with a different one.
That's
They're
correct.
just example scenarios.
Yes, all of these decisions for a bond amount, when to go for a bond, all of those logistics is the board's pleasure. So it was just a matter of bringing together the thoughts of the committee up to that point, and to give the public sort of a ballpark of what that would look like. And really, those brochures were meant for the committee to then communicate out with the public on this is what that might look like.
I think that's a really good point to emphasize, that it's a snapshot of cost at a current market condition, escalation, bid climate, construction climate, marketing conditions, as you move through this high school. It would have to just be reviewed and analyzed and updated. So.
One thing is for certain, that every day that we prolong the process of going for a bond, the more expensive things get. So that is a fact.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I don't want to dig into the weeds now, but just maybe for follow-up information, one of the few things that I've heard consistently whenever I've brought up this idea with just general folks I interact with is the question of, well, why not just rehab the old high school, right? So what is the actual projected delta between rehabbing it and raising it and starting over?
Well, I'll turn it over to BLRB, but I would say the main thing, Jonathan, is it's just not safe to even attempt to refurbish the original high school at this point. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to you if you have some comments on that.
Yeah, as far as the definitive cost, we don't have a specific number for rehab of the building. But there are a variety of things that go into that. If you look at, I think it was the 2011 interim long-range facility report, they had kind of a breakdown of whether or not we replace it or rehab, and it was a little bit more expensive at that time to rehab. I could tell you anecdotally, because historic schools are kind of my specialty and the thing that I'm really passionate about. Actually, we were just chatting earlier today. My first project out of school was, I don't know if you know it, but Stadium High School in Tacoma, which is that old historic castle and the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. That was a 5-year-long project, and it was robust, where we had to essentially build the structure twice, because you have to build all the shoring inside to hold everything up, and then you tear it all down on the inside, and then basically build it again. And I think that would be the case in this scenario as well. There would be some significant pinning of the bricks, especially at the exits and entries and things like that. There's obviously the hazardous abatement, which you would have to do anyway, regardless of whether or not you rehabbed it or any of that. But you would likely tear out all of the walls. You got a lot of unreinforced masonry inside there, so all that would have to come out. So it would basically be a shell at that point. There are different scenarios where you could potentially save portions of the historic building or think of it from that perspective. And we've done that in the past where there was kind of community reverence for the structure. Gresham High School is an example. I don't know if you're familiar with Gresham High School, but we recently did that modernization, and it's an old Art Deco building. We took down historical artifacts and put them into the new structure. So there's different ways to look at it, but I think it would I could say definitively it'd be more costly. But can I tell you the dollar amount? I couldn't with honesty at this
Okay.
moment.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
There was some talk of saving the facade, if I recall, really early on. The interesting thing for me as a newcomer to Silver Falls was there wasn't a lot of sentimental connection to the building from what the committee, from their feedback, which I thought was just interesting, that's all. But there was discussion about that. Do we
Yeah.
save the facade? Do we use the bricks? Do we?
Yeah, and we talked about it in our long-range facility planning meeting. That I don't remember which one it was, but I think it was 6 or 7. And we asked the question, you know, what's the committee's feeling on the historic building? Because that's where we always want to start. You know, it's can we adapt the historic building? Does the district have the desire to do so? Does the community have the desire to do so? And at least in our committee, it was pretty unanimous that no, you know, it's more about the location and its relationship to Schlater than it was about the building itself. So that was kind of the recommendation of the committee at that time. But it's a good question, Jonathan, and something that the board would really want to analyze.
Yeah,
moving
it
forward.
may just be the people I interact with, but they were all far more interested in, well, don't tear it down and build some ugly thing. It at least looks nice.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of feedback, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know, a potential next step, you know, as you move forward with the bond recommendation and the ultimate campaign, is you may consider keeping some of that and showing that in your marketing bond collateral. You know, this is how we intend to preserve the historic, you know, components. You know, there's a variety of ways that can be addressed, I think.
Well, I'll just speak real briefly, having gone through this several times before. That is a question that came up. There was a group of people that were kind of spearheaded by one individual here in town who's got some history and some experience of renovations and construction, and you know, the message was kind of pushed that, well, it'd be way cheaper to fix the existing building. And so, you know, that message kind of got out, and then it came back as feedback from the community. So it might be a question that we have to answer, not from the standpoint of spending a lot of money to figure out what the delta is, but maybe to kind of get, you know, rather than just say, well, it's quite a bit more expensive, we might have to actually put a number on it.
Well, and we have done that many a time, so giving some assistance with that, because it's not only based on the construction cost itself, the painting, the structure, the rehabilitation of the brick, etc. The project cost for any type of modernization or renovation is, for a new building, you can see anywhere between 4% and 7% contingency, where it runs 7 to 12% contingency, because you're dealing with latent conditions. What are you digging out? What foundation? I mean, I don't know how many times we've done historic buildings where we've actually removed and modified structural bearing walls and found out the footings were 24 inches away. And wait a minute, we can't bear on it. I mean, those types of situations, and we could help you with that for sure, if that's an approach that makes some sense to message the community.
Yeah, appreciate that. We really didn't, I don't recall hearing any real sentiment about wanting to save the building for the sake of sentiment's sake. It was just all really related to costs. And I know there's also the issues of, you know, being in a phased and having to live in the building, and that plays into rehab versus tear down, and then also the issue of educational adequacy, that you can design something new from scratch and with what we've got.
Oh, and that's
there.
a really good point. One of the project cost components when we evaluate those existing buildings is there's a planning efficiency that's limited, because you've got an existing configuration of a building in the 1950s or the 1930s or whatever that would be. And so all of a sudden those educational adequacy components require extensive modernization or addition, right? I mean, because to get some of those agile spaces. So that is a concern.
Yeah, kind of anecdotally, just because we love anecdotes, but you know, a couple of those historic buildings that we've worked on in the past, the Stadium High School, the first one that I worked on, there was a whole basement that was not identified in any of the drawings, any of the surveys, you know, any of the information. There was no way to determine that there was a basement. You know, those are things that are really costly to find. Similarly, the same architect that rehabbed that building in 1906 opened up a smaller elementary school that was an old historic elementary school, beloved by the community, and we rehabbed that one as well. Underneath the slab, they literally pushed over an old building in that location and filled underneath that slab with just junk. It was just bricks and you name it. And so we had to over excavate inside of a building. So, I mean, those change orders, that was a 10% change order rate on that particular building just because of those unforeseen conditions.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to comment on the old building. I mean, I think that was a conversation that we've had years ago, and I think we're pretty much through it. I mean, the topic's still going to come up and be prepared for it, but I think I would, you know, I think Jonathan said it best, you know, yeah, if you're going to replace it, just don't replace it with something ugly.
Right.
That's a really beautiful building, and I think
It
that's
really
what
is.
it's just
Yeah.
a good landmark building, and you want something that looks good, that's worthy of that location.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the way to look at it, I
Well
think.
said, Tom. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Greg. Thank you,
Yeah,
Jonah,
appreciate it.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And at this point, I'll ask our committee members to come on up, join us up here, and Brett Davison's going to come on up as well. And we have Eliza, who's been promoted as a panelist. And so I've asked our committee members to come, and I reached out to them because they've been part of the process for pretty much the entire duration and attended almost every meeting. So, and as you know from Jonah and Greg, you know, I don't think there's been a more in-depth process for long-range facilities planning than the one we've done here in Silver Falls. And that does not mean that process has gone perfectly either. It's been met with twists and turns. You've had 3 different superintendents who have had you know, connection to this process as well, and we've also had pre-COVID and had to go through in-person meetings all the way to virtual meetings as well, which is really difficult to do when you have a large diverse group like we've had. So I want to go ahead and turn it over, and Ray, I think we'll start with you, if we could. And I've told our committee members that they have, you know, an average of 5 to 7 minutes to kind of summarize what their thoughts and feelings and perspectives have been. And so I'd encourage you to listen to that, and they may have some points they'd like to get across to the board.
I'm Ray Kaiser. Good evening, and thank you for the time to make a personal observation. First of all, I would like to thank the committee members for their perseverance, their willingness to advance ideas and to listen to others, their objective analysis of reams of data, actually too much to analyze, and their unending ability to ask pertinent questions. The report is huge, and hopefully it will be used extensively. I support the 2 primary results, one being to replace Silverton Middle School and the other to use bond money to finance needed fairly major improvements, maintenance type improvements. The second one, I believe, is unfortunate that districts must ask for bond money to pay for deferred maintenance. I know none of the details, but I would suggest the district investigate the use of the local option levy, which is a levy. It has to be voted upon, I believe, and but it's a set time, and anyway, it's another way to raise some money. I never saw any document that specified the charge for the Long-Range Planning Committee. Maybe the title was considered to be sufficient. I admit to quite a bit of confusion in the early meetings until I realized that there were 2 projects going on simultaneously. One was compliance to the ODE facility report, and the other was all about long-range facility planning. I would recommend in the future that these 2 tasks be done separately. I would comment on the ODE side that some of the data was obtained from staff interviews, so that there may be some inherent bias in those numerical values. Also, that report did some averaging, and I think the use of average gave some very misleading results, if you will, and Scott is aware of that, and so he can give you more details if you're curious about that. The committee spent considerable time discussing the bond amount and corresponding millage. This activity led me to think that we would be recommending a bond amount to the board, which is not the case. We learned that late in one of our meetings, and I suspect that I'm not alone in this regard. The report implies that it's a 10-year plan. In my opinion, it's closer to a 5-year plan, the time required to build a new middle school. I'm disappointed that we did not have the opportunity to analyze in any realistic way the truly long-range needs of the Silver Falls School District 20 to 30 years. I know this is difficult, but a realistic assessment of the useful life of all buildings in the district is needed. I believe that such a report should start with the goal of a uniform curriculum throughout the district, and then an assessment of facilities needed to meet those goals. Too often this process is reversed to the detriment of the educational part. I'd like to say a little bit about one section of the report that deals with learning, not facilities. And I think that was really great that that subject was placed in the report. Learning was a small part of committee discussions compared to facilities, but it obviously is the most important to me. These comments reflect my own personal bias. Obviously, I have no quarrel with what is in the report, but would like to react to it. I think we all agree that the buildings are simply put, the space for learning, which is our ultimate goal. Our buildings must be safe, flexible, and a great place for our staff to utilize their skills. To me, that statement means that the needs of the staff are a higher priority than that of the students. That's not to minimize the needs of the students. Obviously, the needs of the two groups are different. I believe that staff members should be part of a school building design process. They will look out for the needs of the students as well. The report mentions student learning styles. I agree that humans learn differently and that conditions must be addressed. However, I believe that it is not the building that provides the solution to different learning styles, but that it is the staff person who makes the proper accommodations. The building design must reflect reasonable ratios of teachers to students. That's operating dollars. You're well aware of that. So that small specialized learning areas are nice, but they may not be practical. Student learning styles is not new. I tussled with this aspect of learning often during my entire teaching career. Hindsight now makes me think that I should have spent more time having the students discover their own learning style than helping them to learn how to use it effectively. Time in school is short, and so I just couldn't resist adding this. A side comment is that I believe most certainly that 3 or 4 hours a day looking at a computer screen does not address varied learning styles. My background, simply put, is that I have taught at the university level, the middle school level, and the high school level. I wrestled with this afternoon, and Scott didn't give us any real definite directions, but I had occasion over the weekend to go through some old picture folders, and I came across an article that really I think it's pertinent, and it's slanted on the education side rather than the facility side. But I decided I was going to take a little bit of my time and read it. And so this is the Statesman Journal, April 1999, all right? And back in those days, I don't know if they still do, but you had the opportunity to offer or present a guest editorial. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. So here goes. Teenagers abandon school for many reasons, one of which is irrelevant coursework, as mentioned in the Statesman Journal article on March 21. I have no quarrel with your statement that from the student's perspective, some courses are not practical nor relevant. I do question the unspoken a priori assumption that because a teacher holds students accountable or coursework is difficult or it is not related to a student's particular interest at the time or does not meet a perceived need, that therefore the educational experience is irrelevant. Education by definition is relevant. If not, why bother? Mm-hmm. The dictionary defines relevance as being applicable to the point or bearing on the matter at hand. Skills in communication, working with others, critical analysis, and observations are learned in high school when one tries to understand Shakespeare, the message, or when one produces carbon dioxide gas by mixing baking soda and vinegar. Shakespeare or vinegar may not be important for all, but the learning process is. A small angle approximation in math is something that a student might think the teacher just imagined. But it becomes appropriate if you want to realize and do some calculations about the small differences in height of the ocean surface between Hawaii and the Philippines. This is an event that produces the La Nina. So the matter at hand for education is to learn and apply skills in the classroom to prepare for a future problem that is different. Skills learned today may not be needed tomorrow. Occasionally, I use the slide rule. Sorry, I can't lick my fingers to get these apart. I use the slide rule for math calculations, but its utility pales beside my computer spreadsheet. The tool was not available when I learned the slide rule. In my ability to calculate quickly, accurately, and in large volume, if that determines future success, then I must learn how to use the spreadsheet. Confidence in my ability to use either one is very important. Educational gratification is not instantaneous. Many young people expect it to be so and confuse this with relevance. They haven't the maturity to know and believe that skills learned today will be used later. Their youth precludes a variety of experiences, and their mindset has been there, done that, and won't need it, forget it. My intent's not to be harsh on kids. That's the way they are. That's the way I was. Josh probably fits that category too. And future generations will be as well. I delight in the opportunity to teach and the opportunity to teach such a creature. However, the value of today's lesson is determined by tomorrow's evidence, which comes to those who are patient. So that was the sum and substance of my editorial, and so I appreciate you giving me the time to read it. And so my closing comment is, please do not abandon curriculum in the search for facilities. The funnest job I ever had, excuse me, the funnest job I ever had was working with high school kids at SHS. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, thank you.
Josh.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm excited for this because it's been a long process. What follows are just my personal thoughts on the long-range process or work during the session, my opinions on the finalized report that was before you. They got a PDF. Yeah. And were these the edits that they got? Okay. And then my personal opinion of what is most likely to lead to successful bond passage. As you know, this process was really just started by Andy Blando, and then he and his admin commissioned BBL architects, and they, to assess the structural integrity of every building in the district. It's about this thick. We got copies, and so the questions you were asking about replace, repair are in that report for each individual school. That was then taken over by Paul Peterson, as you guys know, and then completed by Scott Drew. Then COVID happened, we hit full swing and transitioned away from our in-person meetings to virtual meetings. And I want to say on record that while having every meeting recorded is great for transparency, it's not exactly great for having difficult discussions. I wish we could have had a few executive sessions, such as the school board gets from time to time, because I'm sure you can imagine why. In my opinion, we started the process somewhat a little bit backwards. What I mean is that after our initial meeting that we had on November 2019, which was attended by a few school board members at that time and many community members, we should have been given previous long-range facility planning reports from the previous committees. This would have saved us a ton of time. It would have served multiple purposes. It would have given us the appropriate historical background on previous bond passages and attempts, demographic history, and what those previous committees agreed to recommend to the school board at that time. And it would also have given the respect to the many hours of work that those previous committees completed. To be fair, that information is available already. We just had to dig for it. If we would have been given it ahead of time, it would have saved us many hours. At times, the process has felt arduous. There was and is an obvious ulcer in the school district, and that's being the middle school. We know we have to fix it. What has been difficult is coming up with the best way to accomplish that. We went through each school in the district along with the BBL architect report, and it became even more apparent that all of the schools are in dire need of repair. We discussed deferred maintenance or lack thereof at length. The discussion for most of this process has been focused on two main topics, and maybe to a fault. That's the middle school and the K-8 schools. We voted as a committee on whether to replace or repair the middle school. Then we voted where to put the new middle school. And after that, we then tackled whether or not to recommend repairs at every school in the district, despite the higher price tag. While consensus has been mentioned a lot in our meetings, it has rarely been achieved. What is a better description of our decision-making process would be general agreement. That being said, we generally agreed as a committee to make repairs at all the schools. We then concluded for the summer of 2021 at that time, and we transitioned into the K-8 community work group, which resulted in listening sessions led by Scott Drew and Jerry Colonna for each individual K-8 school school in the district. Now, about the listening sessions. Prior to these listening sessions, Scott Drew and admin put together that K-8 community work group, of which I was also a part of. It was from this work group of the K-8 community that led to the idea of individual listening sessions that would happen at each individual school. I personally attended 4 of the 7 rural K-8 listening sessions. I commend the report that's before you about the accuracy of the statements and sentiments at those listening sessions being recorded. What is not in the report, and this is my opinion, is the feeling that nearly each of the individual schools see themselves as their own district within a district. While district unification happened in 1997 officially, it feels as if it never actually happened. There is an us versus world mentality that is palpable at each school. Now, in my opinion, these listening sessions have been the most beneficial thing our committee has done. It reminded us of how great our staff, students, and families are in this district. These sessions helped people to feel valued and heard. They were not recorded visually, and comments that were recorded remained anonymous so individuals felt safe to share their feelings amongst their peers and to the school district administration. We utilized the professionalism of both Scott Drew and Jerry Colonna, and I want to personally commend publicly Jerry Colonna on his great work and his interest into our district. He was a master at listening and making people feel valued. His approach allowed for numerous people to share their thoughts and feelings when they most likely otherwise wouldn't have. The finalized report about in front of you. At our last meeting, we spent over the final draft of the compiled work that all this committee has done for about 2.5 years. That's what we did at our last meeting. I reviewed the edits that was made by BLRB and the recommendations of the committee, and in my opinion, they made a great the edits to our committee's work. So thank you, BLRB, for the hard work in making those last-minute adjustments. They reflected what we had gone over in that last meeting. I highly recommend this school board read the entire K-8 Communities Listening Sessions and Learnings Report right here. In my opinion, I believe that it is in this report that is key to community unity and a successful school bond. It's in this thing. I also recommend, and I don't know if I put it down here, these are my last recommendations to a bond, is that it's right here. So, my recommendations to a successful bond. Read the last two bonds, or not bonds, the reports from the Long Range Facilities Plan. Owen was on the last one, and the last one before that was 1998. They're in the big document. Those last two committees have their own recommendations of what our committee probably came up with as well. Some of them are very parallel. Follow up with Mark Twain and Robert Frost with their own listening sessions. This will also be beneficial for staff and parents to express their feelings on the new K-5 configuration transition. I know, Scott Drew, you've already arranged these, but I recommend that each of you, all of you, attend. Explore programs and ideas that bring schools together, where kids participate together and not against each other. We seriously need to consider the long-term outlook of the west side of our school district. Sensitive subject, but we need to look at it. It has been mentioned many times that consolidation is off the table, but 20, 30 years down the road, I'm concerned about the safety of Central Howell as a suitable and safe building for our children. It's not saying anything about the amazing community that it is. It's amazing. I was at the Central Howell listening session, and there was an estimated, my assumption, 15% interest in hearing more of what that might look like. It was not meaning yes. They were just interested in hearing more of what it could possibly be. The rest of the rural K-8s were a resounding no to consolidation. They do not want it. We need to review inter-district transfer policies with changing enrollment numbers. Utilize the community as much as possible. Let them help build and repair the schools. Find ways to make it happen. We have a vast supply of talent and resources in this community. Use them. They want to help. They made that very clear at the K-8. They want to be a part of it. When ODE allows for choice in curriculum and new policies, such as recommendations and not a requirement, do just that. Leave it a choice to each individual school and community to what best fits them. As a school board, continue to exercise great leadership with modeling kindness amongst opposing ideas and philosophy, such as you guys already do. I believe our superintendent, Scott Drew, is a bridge in our community. I feel he is trying his best to navigate opposing views with equal respect and attention. I would like to see him continue to lead us through these very trying times. Finally, I'm hesitant to share, but I feel I must be honest. I do not think a bond will pass until political differences can be mended. I feel as if we're in a crossroads in our society. Can we be decent and kind in our differences, or are we to continue to proceed with our subconscious tribal instincts? If it is the latter, I fear for our future. We must approach each other with love and compassion where possible. We must keep our word and be transparent to earn the community's trust.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
That's great.
That's a tough one.
Sorry.
Okay, it was good. Stroking
Unload.
me up there, man. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep myself, I don't have, these gentlemen did a great job. I've just got some notes here. I have been teaching for the Silver Falls School District for 26 years. This is my 26th year. 4 years at the middle school. This is my fourth. And Robert Frost was a wonderful place to land, beautiful building. Regardless of it was a 3rd through 5th or 4th through 6th, it was a great place to teach. Definitely different building with the open walls. I started with the multi-age, which was at that point 4, 5, 6, and the walls were pulled back. And we actually utilized that type of teaching when I first started. Moving to the middle school and not, I don't want to discount, because Ray's very good. That was such a good thing about curriculum and the whole concept of teaching. I come from a father who was incredibly poor, came from Scotts Mills, and so his only shower and toilet was at school. So his basic 4 walls, heat, warmth, sewage, water to clean himself was at the high school. So that basic necessity we've lost, even within that middle school, within the last 2 weeks. The room 5 and the office, no heat. It's cold. The library, several of the walls I can't put a tack in because of asbestos. The radon, poison gas, through the grounds of Miss Chandler's art room, has since been fixed, but all of that is money. All of that is keeping us away from getting that money back to the students with curriculum. The basic needs of 4 walls, heat, Miss Moss's room, gosh, last week, the week before that, leaking. It's horrible that our schools have gotten to this. And I know every building has their tale, and I just know my tale. And I do worry, Josh, when you said at the end, it is such a, and we talk about it, like when should we put this ballot up, this bond up? Can't be this year. You know, could it be next year? We've got to be able to come back to education. And it's so important. You guys, that whole hybrid year and the whole online year, if that didn't tell you 4 walls was important, then you missed the whole lesson that was trying to be taught to us from whatever avenue you want to think it came from. We have got to be better for our kids, and we are not. And so when the last couple bonds that didn't pass, I know my dad is a huge proponent to education. I mean, Jackie, you should go into it. What was he thinking? And he thought it was a great and admirable profession, and would never, ever vote to turn down a bond. He always felt education, because it saved him. That was what he thought was a wonderful thing. It was the opportunities it allows. I just feel like it does make me nervous to put something on the ballot, to have that hope, if people aren't willing to see that it's not a vote to say that your guys are all wrong or I'm wrong, and it's a vote for no for kids. For you to think something different, you aren't thinking. So I don't know what that means for you as you go out there and you talk to your people who voted for you and your region that voted for you. But it has to be communicated really clearly that this isn't a us against you. This is for the kids. And mine will be gone. Mine will be through. Yours will still be holding on. You still have a few. And we all have expenses. Kids are not cheap. I don't know where anyone ever thought they were.
I know.
And the rotation between daycare to braces to car insurance to college, you're always going to pay money. And buildings are always going to need to be rebuilt. They're always going to need to. So that long range committee, this was not long range. This was a very short range issue. And to communicate clearly that, of course, we're going to need to do more things to the buildings. That's enough, of course. That first line out of your mouth, of course we're going to need to do more. Why wouldn't we? I mean, I drove through Woodburn the other day, beautiful new building. I don't know why our community can't do that. It's so confusing to me because there's such good people. But there's something just disconnected here. And the facilities where everyone went out and talked was wonderful. And I hope that continues, because that was something that hasn't been done. And so I think we're rebuilding communication with the community, but we continually need to. And I agree, I love the idea of, like, why haven't we had a science fair to invite everybody in? We did do Battle of the Books, but we're competing. We do the basketball, but we're competing. We don't ever bring people together, but that requires a lot of commitment in order to do that. A lot of volunteer hours, both for staff and for parents and for students. But definitely something that that's a step we should start to consider and back with our time and our money. I think that's it. Let me hold on, let me check. I gotta get my glasses out. I think, and I do, it would be nice to know, since the middle school moved, how much money has been put into maintaining a condemned structure. And the loss, what that money could have done. I think there's two ways to look at that. Not only the money itself, but the loss of what it could have done. And, just that communication coming from the board as often as you can, behind closed doors, at your dinner table, at church, wherever you're at, just the positive talk of course it's for the kids. Of course we're going to do more. We're a community that shocks me that we don't. That's it.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Eliza had emailed me earlier today and let me know she's in California, and I promised her she would go last because she's the one that has the challenge of Zoom, and Eliza, the floor is yours.
Hello. Sound check, can you hear me? All right. Well, I wanted to begin by saying thank you to Jonah and Richard, who's no longer here this meeting, and Greg for joining us, as well as Steve and Lauren and Scott and who have really provided so much information to this committee. And also Maddie, who's not doing this Zoom control anymore, and Daniel now for doing all that he does to keep us all connected. I became involved because Paul Peterson invited the interested community members to join the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee. And I'd never had an opportunity to join it before because it had always been a very controlled group, and I really have appreciated being able to have my voice and my curiosity heard and utilized by this group. And it's been really great to work with, especially these four and many more other fellow community members that were really engaged in this process. I'm here because I care deeply about supporting our amazing teachers that provide the best possible education to our youth. I have engaged myself because I feel like these teachers need parental and community support simply to have, and they are amazing at the workarounds that they create. While there were some hiccups in operation of the communication protocol between our committee and BLRB in the beginning of our reboot when Scott Drew took over, I've been very pleased with the amount of history and community involvement that has informed our process. I agree that it would have been really wonderful for us to know what the mission statement of the committee was from the beginning. For example, what the ODE requirements were, that we were working on a 10-year plan. We never knew really for the first 5 meetings at least how long the plan was supposed to be. So I think that in the future it would be a good idea to outline that, as well as like what Josh mentioned, is to have some of those previous sources of the previous recommendations from previous committees. As Jonah mentioned, the average age of the buildings in our district is 50 years old, and really many are much older than 50 years old. And he also had told us during these meetings that most schools are designed to last 60 years. So I feel that we have done a wonderful job of keeping our buildings operating, but I also think that it's not unreasonable to think that fresh buildings are something that our community should work toward. Therefore, I think it is a responsible and appropriate choice to build a new middle school that replaces the existing one for approximately 500 students. The listening session showed that most community members of each school prefer keeping their kids in the older, outdated facilities. So we don't need to plan to modernize those buildings. We do need to bring them to ADA standards and keep them warm, safe, and dry. And that's not an inexpensive proposal. I think there may be some workarounds we can work on with our professional community members if we can figure out how to get volunteers involved. Most need some covered play areas and more bathrooms in almost all the buildings, as well as a bathroom upgrade in those that don't need more bathrooms. And parking is also an issue at some of them. I apologize, I'm doing lots of things in my world that don't correlate to long-range facility planning right now, so my notes are a little bit scattered. One concern our committee discussed at length was the fact that we were charged with coming up with a 10-year plan for likely bond that could have a 20 to 30-year scope. It's important that our community considers the fact that it's not irresponsible to build schools for our students, and the sooner we do it, the less it'll cost, because the costs just continue to increase. So I encourage the board to treat this plan as a living document that identifies priorities but can't tackle the total forever needs. I worry about the constantly escalating cost of construction coupled with the needs of all of our buildings for warm, safe, and dry. Therefore, I encourage the district and school board to seek support from a grant specialist to help with targeted needs at existing buildings. Advice that was also provided by Jerry Colonna after the K-8 listening sessions. Like Josh, I agree that it would be really valuable for all board members and any community members that are actually, really involved in the concerns of the needs of the schools to review the listening sessions reports, as well as the executive summary of this long-range facility plan. I also think that streamlining access for qualified community members to be volunteers and utilize their professional skill sets at our schools will allow them, our community members, to carry their deep support and conviction into the buildings. I mean, in my experience with Butte Creek, we were able to put in a playground and do some major work on the asphalt there with the help of community members that had the appropriate skill sets and were willing to donate quite a bit of their time and materials, well, not materials, but tools to install upgrades to that facility. Likewise, Butte Creek School is very functional, very intimate school with a population of approximately 300 students. And I don't think that some of our other smaller outlying schools would lose very much by having the benefits of being a bit larger student population. I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone, and I do agree with K-8 learning. It's been really valuable to my children. I am concerned that we have not seen a report from the maintenance department at a board meeting since COVID started. That sort of echoes what Jackie and Josh were talking about, the cost of maintenance on the middle schools just to keep it going. And also I do know that we're working on another facility, and I don't know if maybe that's where our funding is going. But I encourage the board to arrange a report from Lauren Stanley about where the this small amount of general fund funding has been utilized over at least the past 2 years. Just because I haven't seen it in a budget report or a budget committee meeting, and I haven't seen any reports on how it's spent. I feel like consensus is a strange word to use for what our group experienced. I agree with Josh that it was more of a general agreement, and sometimes we move forward with planning without really, like, we even had a footing on what direction we were trying to head. However, I do think that I think BLRB and district staff did a wonderful job of trying to meet the needs of the requests from the committee. And I think that we spent quite a bit of time working on the bond concerns. It would have been wonderful to know that there's going to be another committee to do that work. And I suppose I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza.
Thanks, Eliza.
I've asked Brett Davison to share some thoughts. Brett has been been with this process throughout the entire time. And Brett, floor is yours to share any thoughts, perspectives you have.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what people said. There's a couple things that came up. I don't know if it was Josh and I that talked about, was it the K-8 basketball tournament, or maybe that was you and I, Jackie, and the Santa Mouse sale. I don't even know if they call it that anymore, but they used to at Eugene Field. That together is really neat every year, because almost all the K-8 schools come as long as they have enough for a team. But then the whole community is there for the Santa Mouse sale, and everyone's just mixing together. And even though they're competing, it's not really, I mean, when I coached boys basketball, they would be seniors in high school, and when they would argue with each other, they would argue about Prattham versus Central Howell when they were at their K-8 schools, or Mark Twain was better than Butte Creek. I mean, they were arguing about their elementary school experience and not really high school stuff. So that's a good, healthy competition if we can find more ways to bring those schools together and just mix like that through different things, not just sports, but Battle of the Books and stuff like that. So that's a really positive thing. So the thing that I went to, as part of the K-8 listing process and part of the long-range discussions from the very beginning when I got here 5 years ago, and then when it became official with the long-range committee. And the thing that was hopeful for me, especially even in spite of how we sort of ended a little uncertain, was that there was a lot of different opinions on the committee, a lot of different perspectives, it was a great collection of people in our community, a great collection in terms of different perspectives. There was widespread support for certain core things. And obviously I'm speaking a little biased in terms of there's widespread support for the middle school. And even in the K-8 process, the vast majority of the people I talked to, with a few caveats, like they want certain things, but I don't think I talked to a single person who wasn't in support of a new middle school. The few people who I've run into that have questioned that, I've just invited them to come to the middle school and walked them around, and they've changed their minds. And sometimes it's people I went to high school with. And I said, no, it's not, you're picturing it from your 17-year-old, 16-year-old brain. Come on down and let's take a look at it, what it's like right now. And almost everybody I talked to, in all the K-8 stuff and everywhere, was supportive of that, obviously with some conditions and concerns about their own school. So that was hopeful for me. And honestly, I was surprised by that, given our current climate and political stuff. I was surprised that was there, but it's there. The feeling of support for other people's kids is there, and so that's something that we can tap into for sure. The sentiment that I had for the high school, so I think, so a lot of people here have graduated from Silverton High School in that building, and I had sentimental feelings for that. My mom graduated from there, my dad taught there forever, and I went there, and I lost that sentiment on my first trip back. So I taught in that building, and then here, and then went to Albany for 3 years, and then came back. And on my first trip back, the first time I saw how it had been reconfigured for the middle school kids, all sentiment went away. And that has been confirmed almost every day that I've been there. I think I was in the library with Jackie came in, she said, something just fell on one of my students. And it's just sitting there working on the computer, and something just falls from the ceiling on one of the kids. And or the water pouring through different parts of the building when it rains too much. And then I think we maxed out at 50 degrees in that wing today. I mean, it's just always something. And when we walk by, we're sitting out there for bus duty, and we look up, and there's guys working on the roof of the old building that has nobody in it. And even the committee, I mean, Dr. K, with his ties to the old building, I think what the sentiment would generally be is, we don't really care necessarily about that physical structure, but let's pay homage to the history, maybe with how we design the front. You know, with Schlater, it's such a great short road right there at Schlater Street, nice and big. The school backed off of the road with the brick. I mean, we can do something to pay homage to the history without holding on to that actual building, and do it in a way where we can keep kids going to school while we do it, I think in a really thoughtful process. So that's obviously by a statement from me, but yeah, my sentiment left a long time ago. And I would, like what Eliza said, I think she said hiccup, and I had written down the process was a bit clunky, and clunky or hiccup or whatever you want to say. I don't think there's anybody that, like if we had the exact formation of this committee with the exact formation of the leadership right from the get-go, we would have never designed the process to go exactly the way it did. And I think everybody agrees with that, with everything that happened that's already been said. But in the end, the discussions that we had, the core findings that we had, and the report itself is a lot of great information and work for you guys to now take and run with. So yeah, we could quibble with some different things, but I mean, I feel really good about the work that we did, and it was a really long process, and it was a bit clunky, but I think generally we have some things that we can all agree on and latch onto and move forward with however you guys decide. So it was a good process to be a part of.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. I think that's really valuable for our board to hear. Before I forget, I want to thank Steve Nielsen, because Steve's been a part of this process very closely. At least I can speak from my experience. We've worked very closely behind the scenes. Steve, I just want to give you the last word before our board has a chance to discuss what they've heard.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge Lauren's presence on the meeting here, and also all his hard work in this process, as well as Debbie's support from the superintendent's office, and also Scott for really taking charge of this thing after you started, and being one of the really the main driver for getting that K-8 work group going, and all of those meetings done. The idea to bring Jerry in and be able to get all those meetings done in person with the situation we're in. So thank you very much for that. And I just want to say, I really have nothing else to add in terms of takeaways. I think it's been very well said, and I just can't thank the committee enough for all of the time they put in on this. It did take a long time with a couple of distinctive breaks. And Josh and Ray and Jackie and Eliza, thank you for your thoughts this evening. I really think you did an excellent job of summing up the process, the key takeaways, some of your own personal thoughts and takeaways. I think they were very well shared, very, very honest and heartfelt. And, even though there were some clunky times for various reasons, I really do think that we came away with a lot of really good information for the board to digest and take forward and make some decisions about where we go. And last but not least, I just also want to thank Greg and Jonah and also Richard and the team at BLRB for all of their real hard work and sticking with us through this very long process. It's much appreciated, and it's a pleasure to work with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Well, and having said that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, board, and so that you could discuss what you've heard and learned tonight. And of course, my team and I will be here to answer any questions. For those of you who gave your thoughts and perspectives, feel free to stay. We'd love to have you, but other than that, I'll turn it over to you, Jonathan.
And just on a practical note, so this is the presentation, but there is an action item related to this.
On the 14th of February.
Which we're going to be
Yes.
tackling on the 14th of February. So questions either right now or in the meantime or during that meeting would be great. Just make sure, we have to approve the plan, right? So that's really what's coming up next. Just making sure everybody was grounded on what the next steps were.
So make sure the discussion is around the report for sure, because that's
Right.
the first order of business.
Right, agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. And, I'll just add a couple of thoughts first of all, I really appreciated the perspectives that I heard, right? I didn't sit through all or even some of those meetings. I wasn't part of the committee, so it was really helpful to get that perspective and to hear where you guys were coming from. Some great recommendations coming out of that. And so I really, really appreciate you taking the time. You all took time to put notes together and make sure you had your thoughts organized and shared a lot of great info, and I really appreciate it.
Do you have an order of the way you want us to go here?
It is a discussion item, which means we can open it up for discussion.
Well, I can start. If you
Yeah, go.
recognize me.
Go.
I wanted to say that I read the executive summary today, so it was fresh in my mind. And when it got to the piece about education, and just in case you guys don't know, I'm a teacher. So when it got to that part about education, that piqued my interest, right? And I immediately started thinking of Robert Frost, because it is a unique design, and I actually haven't spent a lot of time in there, but if you just walk in and people start calling it a mezzanine and this and that, it's like, oh, this is different. And I wonder if teachers utilize that in the manner in which it was designed. And I know I've been in a brand new building before, and there was this part that was specially designed for this special purpose. It never once was used for that special purpose. And so I thought about the teacher input piece, which Jackie brought up too, and Ray brought up, is that when I actually am teaching in a new wing right now, and there are some things that I went, about. Like, I'm really thankful, and overall it's an awesome space, but if they would have consulted me about part of it, it would have been different. And
Exactly.
I hope that, and this doesn't have anything to do with the report necessarily, but in our process, I hope we have a chance to bring our educators in to think about design and just give that one perspective, because I know the work that we do is so hard, because we have to keep the train moving and build this other track over here. And for our principals to be able to manage, both of those things at the same time and get their staffs to give input, I think is a really hard job. And so I'm hoping that we can make pathways to prioritize that kind of work, because I think it's really important. I think that's all I have for this round. I have something else to say, but I'll wait until everybody else steps in.
Who else has thoughts to share with the board or with them, or questions, or?
I'll say, like, I've had a unique perspective because I was on the committee and attended most of the meetings. So I've since kind of excused myself once being elected to the board here in July. But first and foremost, I want to thank Eliza and Jackie and Josh and Dr. Kaiser for all the work you guys did. You guys, as an observer and participant in the committee, you four were extremely vocal, and I mean that as a compliment, and very spearheading a lot of our discussion and bringing amazing perspectives to the table when we were navigating some tough times. And I agree with everything you guys all said. It wasn't perfect. The process wasn't the best. We didn't shove off from land, probably like we would if we started today. I think that's an agreement, and I 100% agree with you too. But each one of you and all the other community members brought very, very valid, passionate perspectives, and just want to, again, say thank you for all you guys have done for this committee. But like I said, as somebody who participated in many of the meetings, the long meetings on Zoom, which none of us are a fan of, the end result here, and I've, again, participated in the meetings, read through the report, read through the executive summary, gives us a great place to start here, and it's a sound recommendation to jump off of. We know what we need to do at the middle school. We know loud and clear from the K-8s what they'd like to see. There's more input that we got from the listening sessions this summer that may amend some of what we do in our final plan, but I think the plan that we have before us, and again, as a participant and now as a board member, is very sound. And it's a good starting part. I love that the comments, somebody said it's kind of a living document as we go through here. No doubt there's going to be some changes, but the basic tenets of this are sound. And there was many meetings, much consternation, much discussion around this. Again, process may not be perfect from day one, but the end result is sound and gets us a great place where we need to go then, take this as a board. Then this is only the beginning. This is the beginning, the tip, right? The hard work really is going to start from here on out in what we do with this, and eventually seeking a bond to upgrade our facilities, which are each one of them are so dire and need help. So I'll just say that as, again, as a participant, now as a board member, the document that we have before us is a sound jump-off spot to get what we need done.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I really don't have too much to add. I mean, it's the report is great. I mean, I can't think of anything that wasn't there's nothing missing. I mean, it's all, and I really like all the perspectives at the end from everybody. That was a long process. But, everything, all the topics that needed to be talked about are talked about in that report. And it's like Aaron said, it's a great place for us to start and to keep moving forward and hopefully get some facilities taken care of here in the next few years. So thank you very much. It's great. It's a great job, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody that was on the committee. I want to thank you for your work, and I'm so happy you came and spoke. I really do appreciate, because it was over 2 years that you gave of your time and your thoughts and the investment that you placed. It's just, it really shows how we care so much about the school district and its legacy. I agree with each of our committee members. I think the process had its lumps and bumps that were tricky to navigate through. But I'm grateful that we now have the reports documented, and we have some very big decision making to make, especially with the cost. Just looking through those numbers and doing I'm only good at basic math, Dr. Kaiser. I'm not past pretty much the multiplication maybe path or addition and such, but we have a lot to consider. The amount of deferred maintenance and building of the new middle school that I so hope for. And so this bond really has to be and I would agree with Eliza that we need all the help we can to really write and prepare a sound bond to get this passed and to provide that excellence and environment for those students. Because, this is about where we're at right now, but for the future. And that's what long range should be about. And we have to think past the 5, 10, and 20 years from now and beyond. So thank you again. And there is much to consider, and I hope that each of you down on the committee doesn't mind coming back. And if we feel like we're off track, then put us back on track. It's okay, because it really means a great deal. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lori.
Jonathan, I might just take a second and make a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Right? So I was kind of a latecomer to the group, but I did want to speak to just a couple of thoughts that I had. One was I was so impressed at how invested everybody was at those meetings. And it kind of came out in maybe a negative way at our second to last meeting when some folks kind of learned that maybe their scope of what they were going to get to recommend wasn't as big or wasn't what they thought it was going to be. But after that meeting, several people came up to me and they said, even though we may not get to strategize like we wanted to do, or we may not get to recommend as specifically as we wanted to, we just want you to know that we're behind whatever the board does. Mm-hmm. And that really struck me that that's going to be the same for all of us board members as well. It's unlikely that each one of us is going to agree to every single detail of the strategy and every single detail but collectively, it's really important that we're all on the same page, and it's really important, I think, that the members of the Long Range Committee are all in support as well, that it's going to take us all together to do it. So, yeah.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, Janet.
You guys have just articulated all of those points so beautifully. I don't really need to say a lot. I just did want to take a minute to acknowledge the really hard work of the work group, of the committee. It was, I'm sure, just a really difficult several years under different leadership and really difficult circumstances. So the report is amazing. It's such a testament. And even just looking at the school district website with all of the presentations and the agenda and transparency to the community, I think it's going to go a long way. I think the fact the committee itself was such a great representation of our community. And that the way you conducted yourselves and your business and your analysis was itself also very transparent, is just laid just as a really good foundation. And so, yeah, the next step is a different type of challenge. I really appreciate Jackie's comments about this is not really optional, folks. This has got to happen, and it should feel normal. It should feel like, yes, this is going to happen, and we need to be investing in our students, and this is how we do it. And so the more that we, set that expectation in a calm way, but also acknowledging, people's concerns and giving them all the information they need. But we can't keep sending kids into buildings that don't reflect our love for them and our commitment to them flourishing. So thank you again to the whole group, to our district leadership, our architectural consulting firm. Thank you. Just fantastic work. So proud of, of all of the work that you guys have done. So thank you.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you, Janet.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I wanted to say that I was thinking when y'all were presenting, and thank everybody, by the way, I'm just amazed at all the work that you've put in. And you're kind of handing it off to us now, and I don't want to screw it up.
Yeah.
And so, seriously, just like, the idea, like this is potentially a once in a generation opportunity. And just like I'm mad that the covered area isn't big enough at my school,
Right.
I'm like, that's never going to get fixed now. That was our chance and we blew it. I don't want to blow it. And so I really want to know, while you're here, what P1, P2, P3. What are your thoughts on the amount and balancing those needs?
I'll go. Just a couple things. So this P1, P2, P3 was just basically an idea of what that would look like. There is a complete list in this document later. This is something I want to reiterate, is that what those levels are is in here, and there's a whole section also of what the schools wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going through these reports from 98 to 2012, these schools have been asking for the same things for 20, 30 years. One of those is covered play areas.
Mm-hmm.
We've never delivered. So Scott's done the good work, and are you still planning to go back to them still?
Yep,
A lot of work.
Those will start next week, I believe.
Proving that we're listening to every school, from Mark Twain, Robert Frost, and all the K-8s, that we heard you, and as a board, look into that. Second, if you guys have any questions, it's not just us four. Tom Newton was an amazing numbers guy. He cranked all the numbers out for the committee. You've got a variety of people else on the committee have their own specialties. Like you said, this group was amazingly formed by volunteer helpful. We have pre-existing teachers, educators. If you guys have a question, email us.
Yeah.
Like you said, we spent almost 3 years on this. The last thing we want is not to have it to pass. So
Yeah,
whatever you guys need, please ask.
If I could add just a little bit, there's so many details and the timeline is so long, it's hard to be sure that this is exact. But I believe we went through the numbers pretty carefully, as best the architects could, in terms of estimating the cost of a middle school. And then the discussion was, and so that's one list. And then here is a list of all the needs everywhere else in the district. So the dilemma for the committee was, how do we be fair, whatever word you want to use. And so I don't really know where the number came from, but the number was 15% then was the number that we worked with, and that's reflected in the reports, I believe. So that 15%, give or take, of the bond money will be used throughout the district, and plus the amount that is needed for middle school. And so to go much more in detail beyond that, it's just almost impossible, except the district staff then did do some prioritizing, I believe, with that 15% money as to what the greatest needs are. And I think that's kind of in that report.
Scott, can I ask a clarifier, just to kind of, because to Jennifer's question, kind of about the numbers, asking, the last scenario, I think scenario 3, P3 was 90 million, am I right?
Yes,
90.
on this document,
Right.
it was 90. We floated the idea around of a larger number, and particularly in the report that you guys got, you're not gonna see 90 very often. You're gonna see something, if I remember, closer to like that 110 to 130.
That's what I was coming up with, because the true need in our district is more, probably along the lines of that 110 to 130, just to put that out there.
And Piper Sandler did do an estimated report of what that 130 would look like at different households with different bond scenarios.
Yeah, and that's an important note, because part of me is like being a good steward, right? You want to take care of things at the right time, because that's gonna save everybody down the road. On the other hand, this is a political body, and we have to be aware of what people will vote for. And so that's the dilemma. And I hear you, Josh, about the timing issue, and I also hear what Jackie's saying. It's like every day is an opportunity missed for our kids, and we've already missed so much with them with the whole COVID thing. It's like, how do you balance that?
Right.
It seems like those are the things that are going through my mind right now.
One of the things that came up a bunch in the committee, I think there's kind of two main strains, and we debated about it throughout the whole thing, was basically be smaller but so specific that there's no question in the community of what you're going for. Or go big enough where it's a middle school plus, not just, because in the past it feels like there's a big project and then we'll throw some peanuts to everybody else to get them to vote for it. It's got to be big enough where those projects are substantial enough and meaningful enough that people would be on board with doing both. And then where that balance is the political question. But that's a really important one of what people would want to go for. But it's got to be substantial enough or really small and specific. But if it's big, it still has to be incredibly clear from the get-go of what is happening. I don't think we went through one meeting without saying something about whatever happens has to be so incredibly clear about what is actually going to be done, because that's where the trust part is. We spent all that time going to K-8 communities and talking about building trust, and honestly, if we screw this part up,
Yeah.
I worry about the long-term trust for how long this is going to go. So, yeah.
I do want to add where a lot of that mistrust came from. It was the new high school.
Yeah.
And you look, and I hope you guys are all well educated enough on the board that that bond was in 2 phases, but when it was promoted, was not clear that it was. So this is all going all the way back to there. And your points, Jennifer, about contemporary and new and what's most functional. And a lot of it is this building too.
Yeah, I just want to say that Dr. Kaiser brought up a good point about the 15% that we would have enough to create a new middle school, and then I'd like to know more what that would look like, because that 15%, is that going to make enough impact on those other schools to truly make a difference? I mean, for instance, Scotts Mills. I mean, they don't have a covered play area, and they've got asphalt out there that the kids are told not to play on because it's cracked and wavy. I mean, it's older than me, so I mean, it needs to be gone, and those students deserve that. And they have for a very, very long time. Is that 15% going to be enough? And that's where my concern is, and we're almost working conceptually, in the matrix, with some of these percentages, because we don't quite know yet how it's all going to trickle down into what is going to go where. But I keep going back to the strategic goals, and it says each school facility reflects the excellence of education in our district, and that's where I get a little worried about this bond. I want it to be enough, and I want it to make good impact, not just with the new middle school, but the other schools as well. And so what that looks like, I mean, we're really going to need everybody on board and helping out to chisel out the right word, have it well crafted for this bond to fly and definitely go. So thank you for bringing that up, and that has been a concern of mine from the beginning. What does that look like, and how can we just get the most out for everybody so they have those excellent environments for those students that have deserved it for so long. So thank you.
Really a big conversation, for sure.
It
The
is.
amount.
Yeah.
And I think
The timing is an interesting challenge for us, because I think many of you have said different pieces of this. You guys, and I'm looking at you, Scott, but collectively through the K-8 listening sessions and other outreach, I think have done something that maybe hasn't really happened since unification, which is to truly reach out and try to build bridges between the central administration and the K buildings, right? I'm just being serious. I don't think it's really happened before. I think it's happening right now in a way that I haven't at least seen personally. That's going to eliminate some of the historical headwinds that were against this. Some people said, well, it was too much money. Some people said it isn't clear enough. Let's be honest, a lot of the reasons it failed was the K-8 communities were like, I don't trust you, period. The rest of it didn't matter, right? So that's a big win in our column. The flip side is the 11% of families who've yanked their kids out, they're not voting for this thing. right? So we've got another problem that is a new headwind, and we have to figure out the timing on this. Every day we wait, it's gonna cost more, but if we
Oh,
float
yeah.
it today, it's gonna fail. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's gonna fail. If we had a bond tomorrow, it would fail. And that's for political reasons that have nothing to do with this body. And so you say it, well, if you wait too long, it's gonna cost more, but guess what's worse than that? Floating a bond in May and having it fail, right? That's even worse yet, because now you're out however much longer to try to figure out what a new attempt is gonna look like, and a new bond committee, and a new, right, start the whole process over. And so, for me, that's what's gonna keep me up at night, is that particular intersection of challenges. One of which is completely out of our control. And hopefully, we'll see some easing up that'll make some community members feel more comfortable with some of the mandates and everything else that's keeping them frustrated. So if we can get to that point, I think we got a real shot. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Well, and building on Lori's comment too, like I share the same concern that making sure that that we're investing wisely in everyone so that everyone is safe, warm, dry, adequate for a longer term, right? And I think that's going to be I hate to use the pun of dollars, but it's the $1 million task that's set before us as a board. We're going to have to be laser focused and almost to the point where we've done so much research with our community that we can almost either know or not that it's not going to pass before we even go for the vote.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
And so I think we have to be laser focused as a board, this next steps. And Lori, I think that's going to be our big task here in the next couple of year plus is what's that threshold? We don't know right now, right?
I know.
We kind of have the idea, the concept of how much dollars it's going to take to get everything back on track because there is so much deferred maintenance to get a new middle school in place.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to acid test that out to the community like multiple times to, like I said, to the point where we have such clarity that we know exactly how the vote's going to turn out. So that's
like
going to be a monumental task for us. But
Liza's been trying to.
I have no digging it done. So go ahead, Liza.
I'm so sorry, Aaron. I don't mean to cut you off. I just don't know how to, engage without being seen.
All good.
I just wanted to say that one concept that was floated around that I think you all might want to just keep in the back of your minds is a multi-phase plan that is very clear to the community. So smaller bonds that are very targeted or something, because really the need is currently standing at 175 million as of the 2019 numbers. Thank you.
And
Yeah,
I think
good
I
point.
mentioned that too, when the high school bond goes off, we should be looking for another bond.
Yeah.
Not hopefully this bond, but another one. So
Correct.
money goes off and the bond comes on saying, hey, you guys have
Right.
juggled this finances for yourself. We're not asking for more. We're just gonna ask that you continue putting money into education.
We talked specifically that, okay, maybe we just go with the smallest. Get that done, but tell everybody we're only doing this one, and then in the next cycle, 5 or 10 years, do that. We talked about it. That decision's up to you guys. A strategy point, I guess that's what I think. I just can't stop my brain. Brett Davidson said something to me at the beginning of this when I moved back to town that shook me. Because when you're in high school, you just think about yourself trying to survive, be cool, be liked by your peers. So I didn't see the stuff around me. You always saw those kids that were there late after school, or they're the first ones there in the morning. Because they didn't have food. And that was the only meal they were going to get. They didn't want to go home because of what they're afraid to see at home or experience at home. So they stayed home or at school as long as they could.
Yeah.
If we tell those stories and let people know, because we get so involved as adults in our own political stuff, we forget about the people that have no control over their say of their lives, the kids. And we're kind of not doing the best for them. And they're
Right.
stuck while we squabble over all our stuff. So I hope we can figure it out for them. If we tell maybe some testimonials about students and kids in this process as a school board, maybe we can get people to let their differences aside. You're right, that kid's more important than my little thing about this or that. Maybe it's a strategy that could get us through.
Yeah, and the idea that this is the opportunity for our generation right now. Like, people in the past laid it down the line for us, right? And now it's our turn. And like, I'm not going to have a kid that's ever going to be in the middle school, but it's clearly like that is the most important thing for this district. And so how do we get people who don't have any connection with kids at all to see what you're talking about? Oh, I just wanted to say too, since I kind of have the floor, I agree with Eliza's idea about hearing about just our regular facilities maintenance. It has been a while since we've gotten the list.
Yep. That one was in the back of my mind as well.
Is there more
Jonathan?
interest? Oh, I was going to, it's funny, Ray, you started talking and I was looking at you. And I was going to ask you, do you have any more information on a levy? You mentioned something about a levy, or was that just something that you were just sharing as something down the road?
I was unsuccessful with what I was trying to do in terms of getting some information that, it's online state resources with respect to
The local option. Is that what you're
local,
talking about?
well,
The local.
I started off looking at assessed valuation, and I know Steve's probably got those numbers in his back drawer of his desk, but in that process, I read what local levy, and so that's why I raised that question, that is another way to raise money. But I was just going to make a comment in terms of passing a bond. I think the district could help themselves maybe if we started the information process with the patrons tomorrow.
Yeah.
We need more regular communication, not just to the parents, because they're only 30% of the voters maybe. We need to get that information to everybody who's going to vote about what we're doing good and we're not doing so good and what our needs are. And so you've got to get that information out to those people so that they see it all the time and they start to think, oh, yeah, well, maybe I am going to have to open my pocketbook a little bit. So we can start that soon.
We talked about maybe utilizing our town as a regular column. And I think Eliza was on point with communicating with people regarding that. It just never something that I think we were commissioned to actually pursue. But we did talk about different ways to communicate the process to the community.
And Scott, you know more about this process than I do, I think. There will be more opportunities for people who were involved in the long-range facility process to potentially work. If we do have a bond, there'll be like a group for people to work on to realize these ideas.
Certainly, and that's the board's pleasure to decide how you'd like to include the community in that. Absolutely.
Got it.
Okay.
And we can also get help coaching on how to proceed.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
we're not experts.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Guidance will be necessary here,
Yeah.
for sure.
Steve had a comment.
Steve has a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ray, I appreciate the idea about the local option levy. Basically, that's another type of levy that it goes more towards to help provide more funding for the operations of the school district. Before I came to Silver Falls, I was in the Corvallis School District, and at the time Corvallis was one of, I believe, 20 school districts in the state that had one, and I believe they still do. I think they're on their third or fourth cycle of, they can go for up to 5 years before they have to be re-voted on. I know theirs was $1.50 per thousand, and that's an additional amount of tax that's voted on by the local community. So I don't know how many more districts have it now, but it's pretty rare. But that is something that's always been out there as an option. Oh, and I was going to say I'll provide an updated maintenance report for you at the March board meeting with projects for the last 5 years, as well as just what the general budget looks like. I know we touch upon it during the budget meetings. I provided a pretty detailed report, but it's been 3 or 4 years now since we got too deep into it. We've talked a lot about the seismic projects. I could tell you that in general, our just general fund maintenance, facilities and maintenance budget each year for the last 3 to 5 years has averaged, say, $4 to $4.5 million of our general fund, and a lot of that's going to the people that help keep our buildings, clean and perform our maintenance on the grounds and in the buildings and our utility costs. And obviously, there's a portion of that that's for contracted labor, unanticipated repairs, etc. But it's not much.
Thank you. So kind of circling back, right, so our next step is to approve this. There'll be lots of more conversations and steps to come along this journey. And, we'll kind of get it figured out in terms of who and how we're going to be helped to navigate this process. Again, that'll be somebody, a firm of some kind that's going to help us through this process. So. Anything else?
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you. Wow, that was good.
All right, we are 2 hours and 15 minutes in. We do have 2 more agenda items for tonight. But if anybody wants a quick break, I'm going to offer that as an opportunity, just because we're 2 hours in.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to, as much as board goals was so important to me, I'm happy if we could amend the agenda and maybe do this another work session due to the time that we have spent. And that way we can collect more information and have a heartier conversation, possibly have it facilitated maybe. But I'd like to amend that we remove the topic of board goals from our agenda.
So I'm hearing a motion to defer.
Motion. Motion to defer, yes.
Motion to defer the agenda item to an upcoming work session, given the time we've spent on the previous topic.
Yes.
In particular.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion before we bring that to a vote? I'll say I support it as well.
Oh, good.
So, that's my discussion, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I will bring it straight to a vote.
Jonathan?
I'll vote yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Owen?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Tom?
Aye.
Aaron?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
All in favor?
Good.
All right, well, thank you.
You bet.
Well, with that, then let's just bounce right into our policy update. And we do have a number of first readings, so we will be guided through these as has been the recent history with whomever put the cover sheet together. And I'm just going to go in the order that we've got. I think we do have...
So Dawn had to go.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So,
Yeah.
Janet, do you think you and I can try to cover, or I think we can try to cover some of these.
I think we can. I think it's a matter of sort of our approach here. I wonder, rather than going policy by policy, since there are 20 policies and ARs, I wonder if it would be worthwhile to hit a few of them that are particularly important for our board. So I can go over some of the B ones just because they do relate to our board protocols, and it won't take very long. There weren't huge changes, but I do want the board to be aware. And then Dan, if there are some that you feel are notable that you just want to kind of hit the highlights on. I was going to say that many of the policies tonight I think are very sort of administratively weighty and complex, but not particularly interesting from a discussion standpoint. They're just kind of these, like the FEMLA, OFLA. I mean, it's just these big things that we needed to tackle, but there's really not a whole lot there to talk about unless board members have specific questions on specific policies. And then of course I'm happy to try to address those. But I just wonder if we can kind of carve it up a little bit, because I think if we go through one at a time, we're going to be here for
No, well, from my perspective, that's fine. I did pre-read all of the cover sheets, so I feel like I'm well prepared if you wanted to just sort of dive into a summary.
I would agree with your assessment, Janet, and I think if you want, I think of probably most interest are the B ones that are board related. So I would feel free for you just to kind of maybe touch on those while I scan the other ones for anything that might be more priority.
Yeah, no worries. It's kind of hard to be put on the spot. So, so the individual board members' authority and responsibilities, that's BBAA. I'm going to click through here and pull it up on my other screen. So what was around this policy in particular was our ability to consult legal counsel. And what the policy now clarifies is that the board chair has the authority to consult counsel without necessarily coming to the board for that permission. Because when the board chair does that and we're consulting our counsel, obviously there are costs incurred to that. When we as board members do that, we need to have board authority to do that. So the board needs to have charged us with, please go to counsel and seek this advice. So that would be something that would require board approval. There are situations where we as board members just want to reach out to, say, an OSBA attorney for clarification on policy language, for clarification on what do I do when, because there's no cost associated with that. This policy basically says that we are free to do that on our own. So it does sort of make the distinction between when seeking that legal advice is going to cost the district something, in which case we need to have the permission to do that, and when it isn't. So hopefully that's clear. It's very much in line with sort of what our practice has been, so there's nothing really new there in terms of us having to sort of change our protocols. And really with counsel that that would incur fees, I mean, generally it's Scott and Dan who are doing that. I think it's fairly rare that even the board chair would need to reach out and do that unless he or she was working with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. Any questions about that one before I move on?
So the bit about the cross out, if legal opinion sought involves the superintendent's employment or performance, the request should be made to the board chair. We feel like that doesn't need to be in there anymore because...
Okay, let's see.
I'm having a hard time with that one. Like, what makes that sentence redundant?
I think it's a good question.
I was assuming it was struck out of the sample, and I'm guessing there must be a reason, but I didn't look at the...
Yeah, I'm guessing that OSBA, those are I remember our protocols here, Dan, that those would have been OSBA strikeouts and then replaced with the yellow language. But I can follow up on that. I'm happy to dig a little bit deeper and either wrap back around with our other policy group members or just contact OSBA. But
I just remember a time when we didn't have a superintendent and Jonathan was doing a lot of legal consults, and I don't know if that really applies or not to this situation, but it just made me like, okay, are we striking that because we're going to delegate that power in public? And if so, I'm fine with it. I just want to make sure that we're fully understanding why we're striking it.
Okay. Well, rather than speculate, I will make a note and get you the answer to that question.
Thank you, Janet.
Number 2, strikeout. This last batch we did just was so big that our heads were spinning, so I apologize that I don't remember all of the reasons we replaced language.
No worries.
Janet,
Okay.
Before we move on to the next one, can I ask you too about the strikeout that just says a board member has the right to express personal opinions? Was that struck out by OSBA then, or was that a strikeout that we made?
I think we probably struck that because it seemed redundant with what followed, which was sort of an assumption that a board member has a right to do that, but that when they do,
Yeah,
they
obviously
should
it
clearly
makes the-
identify their opinions as their own. So it seemed redundant.
Yeah, it makes the implied, obviously, that implicit that they have the right. I was just curious.
Okay, I can, since I'm there anyway, I can check on that. Okay. Write your names next to them because I'll forget who asked. All right. BDA board meetings. So that basically this was all about giving people remote access to meetings and making sure that they had electronic means available to them to attend those meetings when possible. Yeah, let's see. There was some question that we had as to whether, you know, if the board was meeting remotely, whether we had to provide an electronic access point. I know sometimes in public meetings law, when government agencies have public meetings, they have to actually provide a room with a computer in it or something. And I did check with OSBA and they said, no, as long as you're providing a Zoom, like an electronic, you don't have to also have designated a location and equipment and so forth. So obviously this is in response to everyone having to do this for COVID. So. And then the next one, BDDH, public comment at board meetings, was somewhat similar in the sense that it was also about providing an opportunity for people to provide public comment if they were accessing the meeting remotely. And then other public comment, I mean, obviously the policy is broader than just that. And it's consistent. We checked it against our public comment practices that we recently updated, and it was consistent with those. And so this just means that people have an opportunity to provide comment at our meeting. We were explicit that if people provide written comment in advance of the meeting, that we wouldn't be able to read all of those comments during the meeting, but that we would then post them if they were designated specifically as public comment to a meeting. We would make sure that they were posted as part of board book afterwards. So but the onus then is on folks to say, hey, I'm providing this email, this comment, and it's for this specific upcoming meeting, so that we know that it's associated with that. So trying to obviously accommodate all of that because it's really important, but not make it so that we had to then read emails, you know, because then you just end up, you can get really bogged down. And so that was that. So yeah, nothing really, a lot of it just changes that came from our new way of doing public meeting in the age of COVID. So,
Janet,
and I think that's
Janet,
pretty
can
much
I
it
interrupt
for things that are really directly related to board work. If there are others that folks had questions on that I can just either answer or take note of, I'm happy to do that. Dan, do you have any that are jumping out at you as things that you want to discuss?
Jennifer had a question, Janet, there on what
Yeah.
you were just explaining.
So the bit about the written public comment, when I read that, my question was, how are we going to know that this is specifically public comment? Because we get emails all the time, and to have to figure out which one's public comment and which one's not public comment could probably be a burden. So I'm wondering if we do need to be more specific about that, because it doesn't, you mentioned, you know, people have to, the onus is on them to designate that it's public comment, but that's not written into this policy. So I wonder about that.
Well, so yeah, help me understand a little bit. Maybe we need to be more explicit. Under procedures for written comment, it says materials or comments identified as public comment for a specific board meeting and submitted at least 72 hours in advance of the board meeting will be provided to the board, but will not be read at the board meeting. So rather than using the passive language, do you suggest being a little bit more
It
clear
just
that
wasn't like jumping out at me that it was going to be clear. And you know, maybe we can just think about that. The other thing that I wondered about is if it is emailed to the school board group. Debbie, you don't receive those, do you? So that's a problem, because then she doesn't know what's come across our desk.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, it's just a procedural thing that I just am thinking about the practicalities and don't want to over-promise and under-deliver, you know what I mean?
Right,
So
right.
That was just
So-
my two concerns.
Well, and
So having them maybe be more explicit that they need to be emailed to the board secretary and just kind of tighten that language up so it's very clear.
Yeah, I think it might be worth considering.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think what it says does say that, it's got to be designated as public comment for a specific board meeting, but I wonder if people would actually, and they do that. We have received emails that say, please include this in the public record.
Occasionally, yeah.
Every once in a
Occasionally,
while.
yeah.
I think one word that maybe is causing part of the problem is the word identified. Identified implies anybody could identify it as such, whereas designated by the sender or submitter might be far more clear, indicating the onus is on the submitter, not on whoever's looking at it to identify it as such.
Okay.
I have a wording question as well. Up in the third paragraph on the requesting for an item on the agenda, it's listing a member of the public may request to the superintendent this item for the agenda, but why are we not including the board chair in that statement? Because in my mind, it would make more sense that the board chair would be emailed for an agenda item. Now, we know the superintendent, chair, vice chair meet to set the agenda items. But why are we not including an email also inclusive of or to the board chair in that sentence?
Okay.
I'm just going to speculate here, not trying to answer the question, but I think in other places in the policy, the superintendent is actually put at the tippy top.
That's what I was thinking. Maybe it's referring to another policy, and if so, okay. But I was just like, well,
It's not cross-referenced or anything, but
Yeah, it's not.
That's just been my recollection, because we went back and forth about this a while back on procedures.
Yeah.
And really, Scott is kind of like the head honcho, I guess. And Jonathan is also in on it, and so, but it's kind of, that's the way it's laid out in policy, or at least it seems to be laid out in
Well,
policy.
it is as far as board members requesting agenda items. It's kind of weird, Aaron. I think the
Yeah.
way that it works is officially the board chair sets forth the agenda.
right.
Right. But it's done in collaboration with the
Right.
superintendent, and requests are typically made through the superintendent to get them added.
Okay.
At least that's how other policies address the matter.
Fair enough. Fair
But I
enough.
wonder if there should be, I don't know.
I generally
cross-reference.
roll really flexible, so to me, it makes sense that it could have come through the board chair and/or through the superintendent, either one. That
Right.
seems perfectly logical, but.
Right. Fair enough. Thanks.
Janet, if we could, I've got some information on BBAA related to the question Owen raised on that. Just not to say you couldn't go back and check on those, but the two changes on BBAA related to the personal opinions, and then also later regarding the legal consult, just to point out that both of those were recommendations by Spencer Lewis at OSBA, so those are coming from OSBA recommended changes. I can't explain why that personal opinion piece was changed, other than maybe redundancy. The other one related to legal advice, I think the key part of this is the part in there that says that will incur a cost to the district. I think that's the kicker in that whole piece there. So that in essence, the one sentence that used to be in there about legal advice about the superintendent's employment, it couldn't be one person going to the chair and then two people deciding to go consult legal, incur some costs, and then not having the rest of the board be aware of that. So I think it's all tied up in the one phrase that if there's going to be a cost incurred, the entire board needs to know, and support that decision.
So even if it is the chair
Even,
dealing with employment issues for the superintendent?
as I read this, request for legal advice, opinions by a board member that will incur costs for the district must be approved by the majority of the board.
So we would have to meet first and confer that authority on
Yes.
Jonathan, and then he could go out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's just another step that people need to be aware of, because I just remember being in that
Oh, yeah, no.
position. It was like, okay, what do we do next, you know?
It was, yeah. Blind leading the blind.
Oh.
Thanks for finding that, Dan. That's really helpful.
And then the remaining policies are largely just legal updates where policy needed to be adopted. There's been many changes to OSHA-FEMLA, especially in light of COVID and different things. So if there's any of those that you'd like to discuss now, I can try to respond, or I could respond if you want to email me any questions. But I don't think there's really anything
I don't remember
too
seeing
significant.
anything that stood out to me in most of the rest of those. Do you guys remember seeing anything that stood out to you? I don't either. I mean, they all seem, like you said, to be related to legal changes, definition changes, things that were kind of perfunctory. Well, I want to respect everybody's time. If nobody else has any questions about policy, we can wrap up our conversation. But I want to make sure I give you all time to bring up questions if you've got them. Okay. Well, with that, we are going to move into a brief executive session under ORS 1926602F to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection, specifically a sick leave bank request. All right, we are returning to our regular open session to consider a sick leave bank request, and at this point I would accept the pertinent motion.
I move to approve a 25-day sick bank leave request for Mary Dixon.
So moved. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, Debbie?
Jonathan?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Owen?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor?
In favor. Okay. That concludes our meeting tonight. Without objection, meeting adjourned.